Marcus thought he was finally getting ahead. Last spring, his manager called him into the office, smiled, shook his hand, and told him he'd earned a raise. A good one. Proof that his hard work was paying off. Marcus walked out feeling proud, lighter somehow, like things were starting to click. That night, he opened his banking app. He stared at the number for a while. Then he did what most people eventually do. He started doing the math. The extra money looked nice at first, but once he factored in taxes, it shrank. Then he remembered his rent had just gone up. His car insurance, too. Groceries? Somehow higher every single month. By the time he finished adding everything up, the raise wasn't a raise anymore. It was already gone. He didn't celebrate. He didn't even tell his wife, Daniela, because what would he say? Hey, we're working harder than ever, and nothing changed. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Marcus and Daniela aren't reckless. They're not lazy. They didn't make some huge mistake. They're doing what they were told to do. They work full-time jobs. They pay their bills. They try to save when they can. And yet, they're one unexpected expense away from everything falling apart. Not because they failed, but because this is what normal looks like now. And once you really see it, you can't unsee it. Most people think financial stress comes from bad decisions, overspending, lack of discipline. But that's only part of the story, and honestly, it's not even the biggest part. The bigger truth is quieter. It's the slow squeeze. The kind that doesn't hit you all at once, but builds over years. A little more for rent. A little more for gas. A little more for insurance. A little less left over each month. Until one day, you realize something strange. You're earning more than you used to, but somehow, you feel more stuck. That's where Marcus is. That's where millions of people are. And the scary part? You can do everything right and still end up there. Think about how people actually live. You wake up, go to work, come home exhausted. Maybe you order food because you don't have the energy to cook. You tell yourself it's just for tonight. But just tonight happens again and again. You subscribe to things because they're cheap. $10 here, $15 there. It doesn't feel like much until you add it up and realize you're paying for things you don't even use anymore. You put something on a credit card because it's easier in the moment. You'll deal with it later. Except later never really comes. Instead, it quietly grows in the background. And here's the part nobody tells you clearly. The system isn't built to help you escape that cycle. It's built to keep you in it. Credit cards don't want you to pay them off quickly. Car loans don't want to be short. Subscriptions don't remind you to cancel. Everything is designed to feel manageable month to month, while quietly becoming expensive over time. That's why the monthly payment always looks reasonable. Because if you saw the full cost up front, you'd walk away. Marcus didn't buy a truck because he wanted to make a bad decision. He bought it because the payment looked fine. That's how it works. Not dramatic, not obvious, just easy. And that's what makes it dangerous, because easy decisions, repeated over time, create hard outcomes. Now here's where things get uncomfortable, but also hopeful, because while a lot of this system is out of your control, not all of it is. There are moments, small ones, that don't feel important when they happen. Choosing a cheaper car, paying off a balance instead of carrying it, actually checking your subscriptions, setting aside something, even when it feels like it won't matter. In the moment, those choices feel almost invisible. They don't change your life overnight. They don't make you feel rich. They don't impress anyone, but over time, they start to separate two completely different futures. One where everything always feels tight, where every decision depends on whether anything goes wrong, and another where things aren't perfect, but they're stable. where you have options, where you're not constantly reacting to problems because you've created space. That space is everything, and most people never get it, not because they couldn't, but because no one ever showed them how much the small decisions actually matter. Marcus didn't need to earn double. He didn't need a lucky break. He didn't need to become a completely different person. He just needed to interrupt the default. That's it. Because the default path, it's expensive, not all at once, but slowly, quietly, consistently. And the longer you stay on it, the harder it is to step off. That's why so many people feel stuck, not because they're incapable, but because they're following a system that was never designed to make them feel free. And once you understand that, something shifts. You stop asking, why am I bad with money? And start asking, what am I participating in without realizing it? That question changes everything. Because now you're not blaming yourself. You're observing the game, and once you can see the game, you can start playing it differently. Not perfectly, not overnight, but intentionally. And intention, repeated over time, is powerful, more powerful than most people realize. Because while the system runs on autopilot, so can your progress. That's the part people miss. You don't need constant motivation. You don't need extreme discipline. You need a few decisions, set up in a way that keeps working even when life gets busy, even when things go wrong, even when you don't feel like thinking about money at all. That's how people actually move forward. Not through big, dramatic changes, but through small shifts that keep going. Marcus and Daniela didn't become rich. They didn't escape reality. They just created breathing room. And that breathing room gave them something they never had before: choice. And if there's one thing worth chasing in all of this, it's not status, it's not appearances, it's that. The ability to make decisions without fear sitting in the background. Because once you have that, everything else feels different. If I told you there are people earning more money than ever before, but feeling more broke than they did 5 years ago, you'd probably think they're doing something wrong. They're not. That's the uncomfortable part. Because this isn't about a few bad choices. This is about an entire system that quietly drains you while convincing you everything is fine. And the worst part? Most people don't even realize it's happening to them until it's too late. Marcus didn't. He thought he was finally getting ahead. Last spring, his manager called him into the office, smiled, shook his hand, and told him he'd earned a raise. A real one, the kind that's supposed to mean something. Marcus walked out feeling proud, like things were finally starting to turn in his favor. That night, he opened his banking app. He stared at the number for a while. Then he started doing the math. After taxes, the extra money looked smaller. Then he remembered his rent had just gone up. His car insurance, too. Groceries? Somehow higher again. By the time he finished, the raise was already gone. Not spent. Gone. He closed the app and sat there for a minute. Then he put his phone down and didn't say anything. He didn't tell Daniela. Because what do you even say? We're doing better. But nothing changed. Here's what makes this story uncomfortable. Marcus and Daniela aren't struggling because they're careless. They're not overspending wildly. They're not ignoring their responsibilities. They're doing exactly what they were told would work. They have stable jobs. They pay their bills. They try to save. And still, they're one unexpected expense away from everything falling apart. That's not failure. That's the new normal. And once you really understand that, it changes how you see everything. Because most people think money problems come from big mistakes. They don't. They come from small, reasonable decisions, repeated over and over again. Decisions that feel harmless in the moment. A slightly nicer car because the payment fits. Ordering food because you're exhausted. Keeping subscriptions because it's only a few dollars. Carrying a balance because you'll deal with it later. None of these feel like mistakes. That's why they're so powerful. Because they don't hurt immediately. They just slowly remove your margin. And margin is everything. It's the difference between stress and stability, between reacting and choosing, between surviving and actually moving forward. Most people don't lose that margin all at once. They lose it quietly, month by month, until one day something small happens, and suddenly it's not small anymore. That's what happened to Marcus. It wasn't the raise. It wasn't even the bills. It was the realization that no matter how hard he worked, he wasn't getting ahead. And that realization is heavier than any expense, because once it hits you, it changes how you feel about everything. Work feels different, spending feels different, even rest feels different, because there's always something in the back of your mind. A number, a gap, a quiet pressure that never fully goes away. And here's the part nobody explains clearly. That pressure isn't random. It's predictable. Because the system most people operate in is built around one idea. Keep things feeling affordable now, even if they become expensive later. That's why everything is framed as a monthly number. Not a total cost, not a long-term impact. Just, can you afford this right now? And most of the time, the answer is yes. That's how it starts. Not with a bad decision, but with a reasonable one. Marcus didn't wake up and decide to trap himself financially. He made choices that made sense in the moment. And those choices slowly built a life that felt harder than it should. That's what makes this so important to understand. Because if the problem was obvious, people would fix it. But it's not obvious. It's subtle. It hides in convenience. It hides in normal behavior. It hides in things everyone else is doing too. And that's why it spreads so easily. Because when something feels normal, you stop questioning it. Until one day you have to. And by then, it feels like you're already behind. But here's where this shifts. Because while the system is real, so is your ability to step outside of it. Not completely, not perfectly, but enough to change your direction. And direction matters more than speed. Marcus didn't need a completely different life. He didn't need to double his income. He didn't need some extreme level of discipline. He needed awareness. He needed to see what was actually happening. Because once you see it, you start making different choices. Not dramatic ones, just slightly different ones. And those small differences, they don't feel powerful at first. But give them time, and they change everything. Because time amplifies whatever direction you're already moving in. If you're stuck in a cycle, time makes it heavier. If you break that cycle, time makes it easier. That's the part most people miss. They focus on effort. But it's not about working harder. It's about working in a direction that actually leads somewhere. Marcus didn't realize it at first. But the moment he started questioning his situation was the moment everything began to shift. Not instantly, but quietly. The same way the problem built, the solution started building too. And that's where this story really changes. Not when everything becomes perfect, but when it stops getting worse and starts getting just a little better. Then a little more. Then enough that you finally feel something most people haven't felt in a long time. Space. And once you have that, you realize it was never about chasing more. It was about keeping what you already had from slipping away. And here's where most people expect the story to suddenly turn into something dramatic. A huge breakthrough, a massive opportunity, some life-changing moment where everything flips overnight. That's not what happened. What happened was much quieter than that. Marcus started paying attention. Not in a complicated way, not spreadsheets all day or cutting out every small joy from his life. Just noticing. He looked at his bank account without closing it quickly. He actually checked where his money was going. He sat with numbers he used to avoid. And at first, it didn't feel empowering. It felt uncomfortable. Because when you finally look closely, you see things you didn't realize were there. Payments you forgot about. Patterns you didn't notice. Habits that felt normal, but weren't helping you. Most people stop right there. Because awareness without action feels heavy. But Marcus didn't stop. He made one small decision, not 10. Not a complete life overhaul. Just one. He decided he was done carrying a balance that kept growing in the background. So instead of letting it sit there, he started pushing against it. At first, it didn't feel like progress. The number barely moved. It almost felt pointless. But something important was happening that he couldn't see yet. He had interrupted the pattern, and once a pattern is broken, even slightly, it loses its grip. Daniela noticed too. Not because Marcus made some big announcement, but because the stress felt different. Still there, but not as heavy. They started talking about money more openly, not in a stressful argument kind of way, in a let's actually figure this out kind of way. And that changed everything. Because most financial problems don't stay financial. They become emotional. They turn into silence, into tension, into things left unsaid. But when you bring them into the open, they lose some of their power. That's what happened here. Slowly, they started making decisions together. Not extreme ones, just intentional ones. They questioned things they used to accept without thinking. Do we really need this? Is this actually helping us? Or is this just normal? And that word, normal, started to bother them. Because normal was expensive, normal was stressful, normal was keeping them in the exact same place year after year. So they stopped chasing normal. They started choosing differently. And here's the part that doesn't get talked about enough. Choosing differently feels weird at first. It feels like you're missing out, like everyone else is doing something you're not. But that feeling fades, and what replaces it is something better. Clarity. Because when you stop following the crowd, you finally see where the crowd is going, and sometimes it's not where you want to end up. Marcus and Daniela didn't become perfect with money. They still had months where things felt tight. They still made decisions they second-guessed. They still lived real, imperfect lives. But the difference was direction. They weren't drifting anymore. They were choosing. And over time, those choices started stacking. The debt got smaller. The stress got lighter. The conversations got easier. Nothing about it felt dramatic. But everything about it felt different. And then something unexpected happened. They stopped thinking about money all the time. Not because they had unlimited amounts of it, but because it stopped controlling every decision. That constant background noise quieted down. And when that happens, you get something most people don't realize they're missing: mental space. The ability to think about your life without money being the first and last filter. That's when things really change. Because now, you're not just reacting anymore. You're actually living. Marcus started thinking about work differently, not just as something he had to do, but something he could navigate. Daniela started considering opportunities she would have ignored before. Because now, they had a little room. Not a lot, but enough. And enough is powerful, because enough gives you options, and options give you control. That's the shift, not from broke to rich, but from stuck to flexible, from reactive to intentional, from constant pressure to breathing room. And once you feel that, you don't want to go back, because you realize something important. The goal was never just more money. It was stability. It was peace. It was waking up without that quiet stress sitting in your chest. And that doesn't come from one big moment. It comes from small decisions made consistently over time. That's the part nobody glamorizes, because it's not exciting, it's not flashy, it doesn't look impressive on the outside, but it works. And in a world where so much feels out of control, that matters. Marcus didn't change his entire life overnight. He changed his direction. And then he let time do what it does best. It multiplied that change, quietly, consistently, until one day he looked back and realized he wasn't in the same place anymore, not even close. And the craziest part? From the outside, it didn't look like much had changed at all. Same job, same city, same life. But internally, everything was different. Because now, instead of feeling like he was always catching up, he finally felt like he was moving forward. And that feeling, that's what most people are actually chasing. They just don't realize it yet. And if you really think about it, that's the part nobody teaches you. Not in school, not at work, not even in most conversations about money. Because most advice sounds like this idea that you either have it all figured out or you don't. Like you're either good with money or you're not. But that's not how it works. It's not a personality trait. It's a process. And the process is simple, just not easy. It's choosing to face things you'd rather ignore. It's choosing long-term relief over short-term comfort. It's choosing awareness over avoidance. And those choices don't feel powerful in the moment. They feel small, almost forgettable. But stacked together over time, they create something most people never build. Stability. And stability doesn't look exciting. There's no big announcement, no dramatic reveal, no moment where everything suddenly becomes perfect. It just feels calm, predictable, manageable. And that's rare, much rarer than people think. Because most people are living in a constant state of almost caught up, almost stable, almost comfortable. But never quite there. Always one step behind something, one bill, one problem, one unexpected moment away from stress. And living like that quietly wears you down. Not all at once, but over time. It changes how you think, how you plan, how you see your future. It makes everything feel uncertain, even when things are technically okay. That's the hidden cost. Not just the money, but the mental weight of always being on edge. Marcus used to feel that. Even on good days, even when nothing was wrong. There was always that thought in the background. What if something happens? That question alone is enough to keep you stuck. Because when you're always preparing for something to go wrong, it's hard to move forward. But as things slowly shifted, that question started to fade. Not disappear completely, but soften. Because now, if something did happen, they weren't starting from zero. They had something to fall back on. And that changes how you experience life. You take a breath a little easier. You make decisions a little clearer. You stop second-guessing everything. And most importantly, you stop feeling like you're constantly behind. That's the real win. Not perfection. Not wealth. Just being okay. And building from there. Because once you reach that point, progress becomes easier. Not because life stops being unpredictable, but because you're no longer fragile. You can handle things. You can recover. You can keep going. And that's what creates confidence. Not numbers in an account, but the feeling that you're not one step away from falling apart. Marcus didn't become a completely different person. He didn't wake up one day with everything solved. He just stopped ignoring what mattered. He stopped letting default decisions shape his life. And over time, those small shifts created a completely different outcome. That's the part most people underestimate. Not the big moments, but the quiet ones. The decisions nobody sees. The habits nobody talks about. The changes that don't feel important until they are.